The public discourse is trapped, fixated on the kinetic cost of interception. Analysts point to the 2026 Missile Defense Review, debating launch-on-warning protocols and booster capabilities. This is a strategic misdirection. The mathematics of a missile exchange are irrelevant when the adversary's objective is not military attrition, but systemic financial collapse. The real war is not about intercepting warheads. It is about severing the system's central nervous system. The primary asymmetric vector is no longer kinetic. It is silent. Beneath the waves, thousands of miles of fiber optic cables carry 99% of all intercontinental data traffic, including trillions in daily financial transactions. CSIS reports detail the growing capability of unmanned submersibles to operate near these critical assets. A coordinated severing of these data arteries does not produce an explosion. It produces a global liquidity seizure. It is an economic kill switch hidden in plain sight. This undersea liability is paired with a second vector in low Earth orbit, satellite blinding. The same systems designed to track orbital debris can be repurposed for offensive dazzling of U.S. command, control, and GPS satellites. The objective is not to destroy the asset, but to induce temporary, cascading signal failure across the network. The result is a simultaneous blackout from the seabed to space. This is the blueprint for creating the blind Leviathan, a superpower with global military reach, but no ability to see, hear, or transact. In this state of induced chaos, the fragility of a debt-based currency is exposed. As seen in previous market shocks, panic, not fundamentals, dictates value. A conflict designed not to defeat U.S. forces, but to trigger this information blackout, initiates a solvency crisis by mathematical certainty. The dollar's collapse is not the collateral damage, it is the primary objective. The pivot to asymmetric escalation is not a strategic choice born of strength. It is a mathematical necessity born from weakness. For any state actor contemplating a kinetic challenge to the United States, the primary obstacle is not the U.S. military, but their own balance sheet. A protracted conventional war is a zero-sum game of attrition they are mathematically guaranteed to lose. This is the solvency crisis. According to analysis from institutions like CSIS and RUSI, the immense kinetic cost and domestic political liability of an unpopular high-intensity war forces a strategic recalculation. The Kremlin, for example, cannot sustain a multi-front, multi-decade conflict against a Western economic bloc without triggering its own systemic collapse. When a symmetric response is fiscally impossible, the only remaining vector is asymmetric. The objective must shift from defeating the asset, the U.S. military, to collapsing the system that supports it, the dollar-based financial architecture. The adversary's weakness forces them to abandon the battlefield and target the banking system. Therefore, a limited, regional conflict is not the primary event. It is the trigger. It is an engineered crisis designed to be a loss leader. The goal is not to win the kinetic battle, but to create the precise political and market shock as seen in analyses of potential Gulf wars or dollar volatility, necessary to initiate a catastrophic bank run on the U.S. dollar itself. The central calculation of warfare has been broken. The legacy model, platform versus platform, is obsolete. The new battle space is governed by a brutal, asymmetric economic reality. According to analyses from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, the cost-exchange ratio has inverted. A state can invest upwards of $5 million in a main battle tank, a sophisticated kinetic asset. That asset can now be neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is not merely a tactical problem. It is a systemic liability. This phenomenon is known in strategic circles as the democratization of violence. It means the barrier to entry for inflicting catastrophic economic and military damage has collapsed. The capacity to destroy high-value assets is no longer monopolized by superpowers. It is now available at the consumer electronics price point. An adversary no longer needs a fleet to challenge the U.S. Navy. They need a shipping container full of cheap drones to impose billion-dollar costs. This equation transforms America's expensive, technologically superior military from an asset into a strategic vulnerability. It creates a mathematical certainty. In a prolonged, low-intensity conflict, the U.S. would be forced into a solvency crisis. Every drone that forces a multi-million-dollar interceptor launch is not a kinetic victory for the adversary, but an economic one. They are not targeting our hardware. They are targeting our national balance sheet, engineering a liquidity drain designed to accelerate a collapse of the dollar system. The operational theaters of the 21st century are not where the media directs your attention. While you are shown conventional maps of conflict, the real battle space is financial. Regional instability, from South Africa to Canada, is consistently misdiagnosed as an isolated crisis. This is a fundamental error. These zones are not the source of the threat. They are proxy laboratories. They are sandboxes for stress testing Western economic and social models before a full-spectrum assault is launched against the core. Analysts at institutions like CSIS have documented this blueprint. An adversary uses minimal kinetic cost to sponsor targeted unrest in a secondary Western-aligned nation. The objective is not territory, it is data. The goal is to measure the precise inputs required to trigger a bank run, shatter supply chain confidence, and observe the political response. Each event is a dress rehearsal, calibrating the financial explosive device for its eventual use against the ultimate liability, the US dollar. This protocol of asymmetric escalation leverages systemic fragility. The declining credibility of US missile defense, as outlined in the critical 2026 review, is the accelerant. It lowers the perceived price for a limited kinetic engagement, the trigger. An adversary, having validated their economic disruption models in a gray zone, now sees a window of opportunity. They no longer need to defeat the US military. They only need to provoke it. A scenario like the one modeled by the Sunday Guardian, a contained conflict in a critical strait, ceases to be a regional military issue. It becomes the deliberate catalyst for a solvency crisis. The conflict is the detonator, but the weapon is the decades of accumulated US debt and the dollar's own volatility. The lessons learned in the proxy laboratories are what provide the adversary with the mathematical certainty that the resulting economic shock will be systemic and final. The calibration shot will not be kinetic. The era of testing America's military resolve is a strategic miscalculation. The true target is its systemic solvency. Asymmetric escalation now follows the path of least resistance and maximum leverage. The financial system. CSIS modeling shows that a limited, regional conflict in the Gulf, as outlined in wargaming scenarios, is no longer required as a primary trigger. The system is now fragile enough to be tested with plausible deniability. The dollar's volatility, reacting sharply to mere political rhetoric, as documented by the Economic Times, proves the underlying instability. Adversaries observe this. They understand that the declining credibility of U.S. strategic systems, flagged for critical review, is mirrored in its financial architecture. Therefore, the logical precursor to a full-spectrum economic confrontation is a limited, attribution-impossible stress test. Within the next 9 months, expect a coordinated cyber attack on the logistics and customs data infrastructure of a major U.S. West Coast port. The event will be officially attributed to non-state actors, but its true purpose is to measure the precise speed and amplitude of the resulting shockwave on supply chains, inflation metrics, and, most critically, the DXY. It is a non-kinetic, launch-on-warning test to collect data for a future dollar collapse.